Few final touches. The antenna connector had snapped in half. I super glued it back together. Super glue works great on phenolic. I think that will hold up. I installed a new power cord down there on the back that I replaced. Patched up a couple minor tears in the speaker. So I think we're good with this. Let's turn our attention to the cabinet. Now the cabinet is in fine, all original condition. Wouldn't dream of refinishing it or doing anything major to it. I'll do the usual treatment. Clean it with Gojo, wipe it down with a little Howard's walnut or mahogany, and perhaps clear coat it with some semi-gloss lacquer to seal in the crazing, alligatoring. And I want to take the safety glass off, clean out some gunk. There's some mildew or something behind it. He does have all the knobs, I believe. Came in a little baggy. Removed a couple screws on the bottom and then undid some thumb screws from behind, and the whole front comes right off the set. And let's see, I guess I take out some screws along the perimeter to remove this board, and then I can finally clean the gunk off. It's between the wood and the glass, this stuff in particular. On the main cabinet, I went around all the edges and glued down, and even near there was getting a little bit loose, and then I put some hand cleaner on it, stuff in particular, the pumice-free variety, and a lot of gunk is coming off. But you can see underneath that that lacquer finish is really crazed, and that's why I'm thinking, or I intend to clear coat over this with some fresh lacquer to help stabilize all that. Otherwise it will eventually start flaking off, and we do have a little bit of loss in this area where some finish already has flaked off. That will just continue to get worse and worse unless something is done to stabilize it. I take back what I said about it not being too bad. Yeah, it is. I'm having to do 2 rounds. This is just as filthy as the chassis was. It just took the hand cleaner a little while to break it down. But after sitting a few minutes, yeah, it's pretty nasty. It's a nice day, so I'm working outside now and focusing my attention on the front of the cabinet. This is quite dirty, as you can imagine. It was exposed to the elements and a lot of fingers from rotating the dials and whatnot. You can almost kind of see a ring of dirt around where the controls were. So that is definitely getting the hand cleaner treatment. And then there are decals. They're a little hard to see, but they are in there. And they'll pop more once I clean this. And then I'm going to clear coat it. And that was protected by the safety glass, so it's really not dirty. So I'm just going to lightly sand it and clear coat that as well. Of course, we want to retain the gold painting, the pin striping, the decal, etc. Here we are after a light coating of spray shellac. This turned out quite nice. This I would have liked to have cleaned more, but the finish was so deteriorated I was worried about it completely flaking off. But I was able to preserve the decals. It'll look better with clear lacquer over it. Right now it's just a shellac wash coat. But, you know, there's only so much you can do when the finish is deteriorating. As if I'd started cleaning more and more of that would have happened and just would have fallen off. Alright, so it's kind of humid, so I'm going to let this sit for at least a day, probably 2, before spraying on some semi-gloss lacquer. Might as well clean the safety glass while we're out here too. It's slightly dirty. Bought the main cabinet outside too, and figured it could benefit from a similar treatment. So Light sanding 220 grit, very light. Don't go too deep, you'll hit the color layer. You don't want to do that. But it knocks down the alligatoring to where it's pretty darn smooth, and if there are any surface crud, paint flecks, whatever, you can sand those off too. Don't use a power sander. Don't even use a sanding block. This has a curved top. I'm just talking about doing this. And that's it. Old lacquer kind of turns yellowy. You think that looks kind of crappy, and you're right, it does. But once I put clear coat on it, it's going to look a heck of a lot better. Alright, now that I scuffed up the heck out of it, let's see what this will do. This is what I'm using. Good stuff, Mohawk pre-catalyzed clear finish semi-gloss. Here we go. Couple light coats, same with 220 grit. Couple light coats, 220 grit, and 2 final coats. I think that is a vast improvement. And super smooth. And here is the rest of it. This inner part came out great. This came out pretty good. Decals are more visible now. Most importantly, it's stabilized. I don't know why, maybe it was the type of wood they used, or from all the handling in this area, I don't know, but the finish is really flaking off down in here, so I did the best I could to stabilize it while doing a little bit of cleaning, but I could not be anywhere near as aggressive as I was up here. But anyway, for about 2-3 hours work, not bad, not bad. So now we can start putting it all back together. Alright, time to put this set all back together. I'm here in a spare room where I am assembling a bunch of sets. I got a lot of sets going out of here over the next 6 or 7 weeks. So, sort of my staging area. Sorry for the echo. So the pitch tube goes in from the front, and we're not going to install that until we have the chassis in place, because it's supported in the back by the yoke and in the front by these 4 adjustable metal tabs, which should have padding on them. It's long since disintegrated. I have some adhesive felt material I can use, or in a pinch I could even use these little felt feet. You just want to get something so you don't have metal on glass. I have reinstalled the glass in the front. Speaking of glass, we'll put that in last after the chassis and the picture tube and the set is all adjusted and working properly. Picture tube, so it tested weak initially, quite weak. And I thought we would have to replace it, but I let it sit on my tester at 7 volts for half an hour or so, which got it up a bit, but it was still marginal. So I used the auto restore feature on my Senko CR70, which is not a full-on hardcore rejuvenation. And it got it up into the green. So I think this will produce a decent image, which I'm really glad about, because just like all the tubes in the set were RCA branded, so is the picture tube, but it's not the original, it's a Silverama, which is RCA's, or was RCA's line of rebuilt replacement picture tubes. And it was really well done. I wasn't sure if it was a rebuild or not, but I think there's a seam here. You can just barely feel anything there, but there's kind of a line here. There's also a seam down here, but I don't think they would have rebuilt it that far down. It's possible. I think that's from the original manufacturing process, but at any rate, I think we're good with that. Okay, we basically have all the knobs. I've heard this referred to as a top hat knob. Very common for them to be broken because, well, you can see there's not a whole lot of meat connecting that outer disc to the main body. There are reproductions being made though. Renovated radios, I do believe. For a while they weren't available because it changed ownerships, but I believe they are currently available. And it goes like that. And there'd be a little window cut out here, and that's where you see the channel number. If we had the other half of it, I could glue it, but it doesn't appear to be present. But I'll let the owner know if he wants. They're not cheap, but then again, if you want to have a nice complete knob, I think they're 40, 50 bucks, something like that. So you can imagine it's a somewhat complex thing to mold, but they make excellent, excellent reproduction knobs. The rest are all present and accounted for. All the time I've had this set, this picture tube has been boxed up and padded. Well, I just took it out, and not surprisingly, it's dirty. The whole chassis was, so why wouldn't this be too? But it does have this label confirming that, yes, indeed, this is an official RCA silver armor rebuilt tube with all sorts of warranty info on it. So I'm going to clean that off and then install it. I did cut out some of that felt material and put some new pads on here. So if all goes well, we're going to slide it carefully right in there. And I adjusted these a little bit out. If we need to, we can raise it or lower it a little bit. We don't want to have any type of strain or stress on that thin glass neck. Well, I have some bad news. Got the picture tube mounted securely, just fine. Set doesn't work. So, ouch, she's got to come. And it's got to be something pretty system-wide because there was no sound. There was no hum or buzz out of the speaker. And if I turn off the lights, you guys probably can't even see that. There's just barely a hint of illumination on the CRT face. So, that's what happens. That's what happens. You just, if you want to get into this hobby, be prepared for frustration. It's not uncommon. You have the set on the workbench, get it all tuned up, working properly, put it all back together. It doesn't work anymore. Could be connection got loose. The tube is knocked out of its socket. That's what I'm thinking. It's something basic. Now I've already tried wiggling the tubes and I've checked my connections. I think it's power supply related. I do get nervous around these early RCA sets because of these crunchy wires. There's a little bit of fraying on the leads going to the focus coil, but they look to be sound. And yeah, I don't know. Electromagnetic ion trap, we haven't used it up until now, so it doesn't seem to really do anything if I move it around, but I think there's something more system-wide going on with this set. I hope it's not to do with the power resistors that I replaced, because that was a bit of work, and I don't want to really have to break into that again, but out she comes, and back down to the workshop, and up on the workbench, and see what we can do. Alright, we are back in business. So, it came down to tubes. I'm really surprised. That's why I do these burn-in tests where I'll let a set run for a few hours, at least intermittently over a few days before I even think about putting it back in the cabinet. So 6AT6, it pretty much crapped out. It was measuring super weak, and that just completely killed the sound. For the crummy video, it was mostly due to a 6AL5. They're generally kind of immortal. It's a dual low power diode, often used as a detector. So we have one in the sound and one in the video. And the one in the video, one half of it was really weak. It's entirely possible too, I got to admit, because I so rarely find a 6AL5. I might not have tested both sides of it when I tested the tubes. I admit sometimes it gets boring at testing tubes, and they're just good tube. And the 6AL5, they're always good. One side tests good, I'll move on to the next one. So I might have burned myself on that. 6AG5 was a little marginal, and a 6J6 was a little marginal, so replacing all those got us back in business. Now it looks a little blurry because this is a test CRT. I'm using an XP4. It's rectangular in a weird angle because my round one is currently in another set. So, all that has nothing to do with the fact that we didn't get a raster. Because with all these tubes being dead or even out of circuit, we should have still gotten a raster, and we didn't. So now I'm wondering, could this possibly be bad? If it is, not the end of the world. In fact, I have my own 721 TS just 5 feet away from me, and that doesn't even have this. Because they eliminated it in later revisions, don't with the permanent magnet type. So I can, if it's bad, clip it out and use something like this to replace it. So to figure that out, I have to rig up some support so I can get that CRT installed and check it out on the bench. So it's going to be up, I need to get support up about this high with some good padding and keep it very stable, and don't want to twist it or put any pressure on the neck or anything, so I'll have to build some kind of jig for it. But, you know, that's what we got to do. That's what we got to do. All right, this is picture tube came with the set. We are in good shape. So yes, I did have to rotate the picture tube a bit. I had to rotate it kind of towards myself. Originally I had it rotated more that way because that's where the high voltage lead comes in, and it just seemed natural to have it more over that way. But with set up like this. Now, yes, if you look at the service info, there is instructions about looking at the internal gun structure and positioning the ion trap in such a way and whatnot. The thing is, though, this is a rebuild. And once you get a rebuilt picture tube, all assumptions are out the window because you have no idea what kind of gun they used and how they oriented it with regards to the high voltage connector. Yeah, often these go straight up. Sometimes they go straight out to the side. Some, like GE Locomotive, the high voltage connector is straight down. So there really are no hard and fast rules when it comes to these. And like I said, with rebuilds, this could be oriented in any crazy way. In fact, the wires going out the back are coming off to the side, whereas with the other picture tube I was using, they were going down. And they're both RCA picture tubes, so go figure. All right, so I will gingerly take this apart and bring it upstairs and get it installed in the cabinet and go through all this again and hopefully get it right this time. Okay, I think I got it. The brightness wavers in and out occasionally, but until I have an actual signal applied, I'm not concerned about that. I have sympathy for the guys who installed these back in the day, the type where it's just kind of floating in there and held by these little things. This is just ready to just slide right out. You need to put this in, which presses up against it. It really snugs it up to the yoke. So I'm glad we're at that point. A pet peeve of mine, if you've been watching me do a lot of triage videos, is missing hardware. So I went out and got a brand new set of chassis bolts. And we were going to have a nice match set of secured chassis bolts holding this all together. Right now, I need to get a signal source. I put the front back on the set and I noticed a couple things right away. One, we have insufficient width. And two, when I turn the brightness up, the image doesn't really get brighter. It gets more washed out, harsher. Now that might be just an issue with the picture tube being a little worn out. That can be what happens. They start blooming when you turn the brightness up, and it starts looking crummy. Workaround with that is use a brightener or watch it in a dim room. But also I noticed the brightness kind of varies a little bit, like it just popped up there briefly. But anyways, we still have insufficient width, so let's tackle that first, because the two might very well be related. Because what might be happening is we have insufficient high voltage or insufficient drive, more likely. In other words, if the sweep width is derived from, or the horizontal drive to the horizontal yoke winding is coming from the flyback, and so is the high voltage. So if we don't have as bright a picture and the width is decreased, it's making me think we don't have enough power going into the flyback. So what I want to do, the very first thing, is, well, there's a few things it could be. One, we could try tweaking the drive. There's a control in the back that controls how much signal is getting to the grid. It controls the amplitude of that signal. But we could also have a weak 6 BG6. We could have a weak damper tube. We could have a weak 6 SN7. In other words, I want to check the tubes inside this box. So I'm going to pop this open. I got my tube tester up here. Let's check that stuff out. There is. Well, turns out the 6 SN7 horizontal oscillator tube inside the high voltage cage was weak. It was in the red zone on my hiccups 600A tester, so I popped in a new one. And immediately we have a few things that are different. One is I can't get a horizontal sync because the frequency has changed just by replacing the tube. 2, it seems to be brighter, and 3, we have more width. So on the back, bottom one is horizontal frequency. We're going to put the horizontal hold in the middle of its range and adjust that till we get a lock. Now there's also a horizontal locking range. The two somewhat interact. But first let's just go for lock and then we'll do this. The idea with tweaking this one is ideally you can rotate the horizontal hold quite a bit from left to right and you won't lose sync. Go off channel or disconnect your signal source and then put it back and see if you still have lock. If you don't, you want to adjust that. In the middle is the drive. That will have some impact on horizontal linearity and brightness and width of the screen. They go into more detail about how to adjust all these in the readily available service info. Okay, after replacing the weak 6 SN7, I put the cage cover back on and went through the adjustments again. Then I tightened down all the bolts and screws, put the front cover back on, had to repair the antenna terminals, but it's all back together and working quite well now.
You think I look crummy enough so the old tightwad will give me money to redecorate? I doubt it. To get Mr. Booty to dip into your trust fund, you'll have to set fire.
So there were a lot of unexpected twists and turns in this project, but in the end it plays really well. It's a really nice set. The cabinet touch up came out looking great, and the picture tube, which it tested weak initially, still seems to have a lot of life left. Replacing the audio output transformer really did the trick. The sound is great now.
Purple.
And rebuilding that high voltage, or not high voltage, but the power supply bleeder network was a fun little challenge. The owner opted to not put a cover on the back of it because of where it's going to be positioned. It's just really not an issue for him, so that's fine. Oh yeah, I put a new power cord on. These nice fasteners on it. So, like I said, it was a bit more involved than I was expecting, but in the end, it turned out really, really nice. I hope you guys enjoyed the journey. Thanks for watching.
Table refinish. That should come to about $200.